Last week, we went over some of the basics of how to get started with Node, Express, and NPM. Today, I want to go over how to, summarize some of the stuff that we went over last week and talk about how to create a project from scratch. So that's what we'll do here. So first thing you want to do is pop up Visual Studio. In here, I'm going to go now to File, Open Folder, or Open Folders anytime you want to open a project. In this case, we are actually going to create the project here as well. So I'm going to go to My Projects. I'm going to go into my repo for this semester. I'm going to go into Unit 1. And obviously, you'll want to do this in whatever unit that this fits into. But right now, we're in Unit 1, so this is where I'm going to go. I'm going to go into Examples, is where I'm going to create this project. And I'm going to call this Example Project. Now, in order for me to have this project, I actually need to have a folder for it. So I'm going to call this Example Project. Now, one thing you want to make sure that you do, you want to make sure when this actually opens, you're actually inside of Example Project. If I hit Select Folder right now, it will open it from the Examples folder and I won't be where I want to. So I need to be in my Project folder. Okay, so I'm going to click into it and this is what I should see. I should see it being blank to start with. That's fine. Okay, so I'm going to hit Select Folder, and just to verify you're in the right place, you should see the name of your folder, the name of your project right here. So you can see how I have Example Project as the folder I'm in. Okay, so the first thing you want to do to get started with your Express project, your Node project, is to open up the terminal, and we need to create that package.json. We need to create that manifest. Okay, so if you remember how we do that with the npm init command. Okay, let's go walk us through a few different steps, a quick tutorial or wizard of the different things we want to configure. So as you can see, it's suggesting the name is Example Project. You'll notice, however, that it's made it all lowercase. So whereas I made the name of the folder camel case, that doesn't really reflect here. So if I want the name of the package to really be spaced as separate words, I'll need to introduce dashes, right? So I might call the name of this package example-project because it has to be lowercase. Okay, version I'm going to leave at 1.0. No description. The entry point, I'm going to change this to server.js. We haven't created that file yet, but we will in a moment. I don't have anything to enter for the test command. The Git repo, it would suggest the Git repo, I'm just going to leave blank. I don't need to enter any keywords. The author, I'm going to put my name in. The license, I'm going to set as MIT. It's going to ask me if this is okay. And you can see that there's a preview of the entire package.json file. I'm just going to hit enter here to acknowledge that. Okay, so now we have our package.json file, and it's just basically our skeleton. Now, there's two things I want to go ahead and set up before I even get going. I'm going to add in two commands. One is going to be my start command. And remember, this is what we're going to use for, this is what we're going to use when we eventually deploy these projects. So that needs to be node server.js. So that's the command line to actually start this server. Okay. Now, I also want a command for development. So I'm going to call that nodemon. And the syntax there is going to be nodemon server.js. So I've created the start command as well as this nodemon command. And those will now be available here to quickly start the server or to start nodemon. Okay, so that's what I'm going to set up first. Now you'll notice both in the entry point here and in both of these commands, I've named that first file that it's going to run server.js. Okay, so I have referenced that file, but that file doesn't exist yet. So let's create that file here quickly. So I'm going to say new file server.js. and there we're good to go. Okay, so it's blank. There's nothing in there yet. I'll come back to that. I wanted to install my dependencies first. Okay, so basic dependencies you want to use for all of your projects. We're going to start with npm I. We're going to install Express. I'm going to install debug, so npm I debug. And I also want to install Dot Env, so npm install Dot Env. Once you have those three packages installed, you should see in your dependencies that they're listed there: debug, Dot Env, and Express. Okay, so we've started our basic server, or installed our basic dependencies there that we need. So the next step is going to be to start laying out the foundation of our server code. This is our backend server, our backend code. So this is where the server starts running. We can, in the end, we'll have more than one file, but right now we're just starting with this one point, which is our entry point. So the first thing I need to do is bring in Dot Env. So I'm going to say require Dot Env .config. So remember, require says I need to bring in this dependency. I need to bring in another package to do my work. And then we're here calling the config method on that package. Now remember, .env is going to load that dot environment file, .env file, to make it easy for us to configure environment variables. But I will need to have that happen first. So that's why this is the very first line in my program. I'm going to give this a quick comment. Initialize environment variables, since that's what it's doing. And then before we go too much further, let's go ahead and create that .env file that it's going to be reading. So new file here. .env. Okay, and inside of there I'm going to set debug to be app : star. So we're going to see in the debug log, we're going to see all of the channels that are part of the application. Okay, so that's my .env file. That's the only setting I'm setting for right now. You can add more settings later. You can even set the port, but for now I'm going to leave it at the default port and not set anything else. That's all I want to put in .env. Okay, let's come back. Now that I've brought in my environment variables, I'm going to start bringing in the libraries that I need. So I'm going to say, let's import some libraries. I'm putting comments on this to kind of delineate the different sections of the code. So what are the dependencies I need? Well, let's bring in debug, which we installed already. So I'm going to say require. And you can see that anytime I bring in these dependencies, I'm going to save them to constant variables. Okay. So let's bring in debug. We then need to tell it what the channel is. That channel, as a general rule, should start with app : because you're saying it's part of your application. And here I'm going to say it's app : server, since we're in the server.js file. Okay, if I was in another file called pony, I might call it app pony. If it was logging, I might say app logging, just to separate those things up. Okay, so that's my debug. I also want to bring in path, which, remember, path doesn't require any sort of dependency install. It's just part of Node. So I'm going to bring in path. Next, I want to bring in Express. I'm going to bring that in with require Express. Now that I've got my dependencies, I now just need to start, I need to actually create the application. So let's say we're going to create application. Creating the actual Express application is pretty simple. I just say const app, it's the variable that I'm going to save the application in, and Express. Okay, and functionally what this is sort of doing is this is basically calling a constructor. Okay, you don't see the word new because this is the kind of older syntax, it uses some older ways of doing the construction. But that's really what's happening here, is you can think of that as constructing a new Express object. Okay. Once I've created the application, I can start configuring my routes. Generally, the first route that you see will be your home page. In this case, I'm going to skip past that, and I'm just going to start defining my static content. So I'm going to say app use express dot static public. Now I can write it this way, and that will say mounted at the root. I could also include the slash. This is implicitly implied if you don't include it. So that technically is optional if you're setting it to the root. Okay. So here's where we're loading our static content. Okay. And I might actually split these up further. So I've got routes, which I'm not defining anything yet, and then I've got my static files. Okay. I'm going to put a little to-do on this, and we'll come back to the home page in a bit. Okay. So there I've got my static files. Finally, I need to start the application. So we've created the application. We've defined any routes we need. We've got our static files here. And then I want to actually start the application. Okay. So here we need a little variable for our port. I'm going to call that port all uppercase, and that's going to be equal to process.env.port. So remember, this is the environment variable named port, which is what I'm pulling by default. But I'm going to say, well, maybe that's not set. So if it's not set, let's fall back to 3000. One question that's been asked a few times is why is this port uppercase? And it really doesn't have to be. This could be easily written as port all lowercase. The only reason that I typically write that as uppercase is kind of the syntax convention that we have from other languages, is that if you really have a constant, which this is kind of a global constant, then we typically write it as uppercase. So that's usually why I'm going to write that port as uppercase, but it can easily be lowercase or uppercase. It really doesn't matter. The only reason that you would I usually make it uppercase is for coding conventions. So we've got the port. Now we need to start listening on that port. And I want to say once it starts listening, let's go ahead and log the fact that it is started. So here I'm going to say server started on port blah. Now you'll notice that I've started and ended this with those grave marks. These are not regular single quotes. I need that because I want this to be a template string. I want to be able to replace the port number in this message. So I've started and ended it with the graves. That will now let me put in the port here. Using the $, curly brace to start a replacement, and then the curly brace to end that replacement. So this will be replaced at runtime with that port 3000. Okay, so I've got a basic server here, right? I'm saying I'm going to host some files from public. I'm saying, create the app, host some files from public, and then let's start the server. Now let's give this a quick run. Let's see what we have so far. I'm going to start up NodeMon. I'm going to open up my browser, and I'm going to go to localhost 3000. Okay, so that's going to bring up a server like this. It says it cannot get the root. It cannot get the home page. Okay, now there's nothing that exists. There's no content yet, right? I haven't created that public folder. So let's create that public folder so we have some static content to be served up as our home page and as other pages. So I'm going to create a new folder here. We're going to call this public. Inside of public, I want to then create my static content. So the first file I'm going to create is my index.html, my home page. Next up, I'm going to create placeholders for any CSS or JavaScript that we might want to apply globally. So in the public folder, I'm going to create a new folder called CSS. I'm going to create an empty file in there called main.css. I'm going to create a folder called JS, short for JavaScript. Inside of there, I'm going to create main.js. Right now, I'm going to leave both of those files empty, but that gives us a placeholder for any global JavaScript or CSS that we might want to apply and use across the entire website. Now in index.html, we're going to lay out the basics of a home page. In here, I'm going to hit exclamation mark and then tab to get my mnet to start filling out my template page. Inside of the title, I'm going to write home page. And I'm going to add a little bit of content to this page. So we're going to have a header first. It's going to say home page. And I'm going to have a paragraph that says this is the home page. Okay. We can test that in the browser real quick. Looking at localhost 3000, we can see that we've got a basic page there. I also want to link up my HTML and my CSS and my JavaScript files that I created just a minute ago. So we're going to add a link for the CSS. It's going to have a relationship of style sheet. href is going to be CSS/main CSS. And then I'm going to add a link to our script, defer it, and set the source to js/main JS. Okay. Format that real quick to fix any problems. So there we've got a starting page for our starting home page. We can test that in the browser just to see that there's no errors, and that looks good. So that's the starting point for our basic project. See you in the next video.